People who work in human resources, what's the most awkward or uncomfortable discussion you've ever had with an employee? Story 1. Didn't work in HR, but I've been reprimanded by them. Did a stint of work for Habitat for Humanity, helping low-income folks with repairing their falling-down houses. Our Habitat for Humanity office was in a big warehouse. The front half of the warehouse had drop ceilings and typical cubicles, while the back half was an open warehouse for storing paint, supplies, tools, ladders, etc. Oh, and this was in the northern Midwest, so winters up there were cold. This figures into the story in a moment. One week, I came in and was told we'd be replacing some interior doors at a house. Sure, no problem. Drive out to the house, get a look at the doors to be replaced, take some measurements, pick up a couple of doors from the big orange square repair store. However, these doors come unstained, and I needed to stain this door dark and put some polyurethane on it to protect it from scratches or dirtying other stuff. Fortunately, my partner and I have this big back warehouse area to work in. We prop the door up on some sawhorses, open the wood stain, and slap it on there. Let it dry, buff it down, stain it again to get it dark enough. So far, so good. But then we come to the polyurethane. For anyone who hasn't used polyurethane, this stuff has some serious chemical fumes. This is the kind of stuff that kids sniff if they've only got $8 to last them from here to permanent brain damage. Sticky, flammable, and with powerful fumes. The perfect combination. My partner and I pop the cans open and slather the stuff on. Dimly aware that the fumes might grow concentrated in this back area, we set up a couple of box fans to blow the air away from this back corner of the warehouse. With both doors covered in a heavy layer of polyurethane and needing to dry, we grabbed some paint that had to be delivered to a job site and headed out in our truck. When we came back, we found the office in chaos. Apparently, all of the fumes off the polyurethane had risen up in the warehouse, thanks to the fans, and then slowly crept down through the drop ceiling into the front half, where all the office drones worked. Pretty soon, the entire building stinks to high heaven of oil-based solvent fumes. In the end, half the workers had to go home early, and my partner and I received a stern talking to from HR about not putting stains or polyurethane on objects inside our building. I worked in an office next to a plant that made fiberglass stuff. Everyone that came in commented on the smell and how high we must all be, but I stopped smelling it after a week. I'm siding with HR on this one. These two guys should have told someone about this. Was there anyone that supervised the warehouse? Sure, it gets cold, but maybe open a window? Did anyone else know what they were up to except these two guys? Story 2. Not in HR, but was the head of engineering at a tech startup. Team of about 20 to 25 people total, half of them tech. One day, someone stops by another company sharing a floor with us and reports disturbing news that someone in our company has brought a weapon to the office. They say that they were in an elevator with a pair of our employees, and one of them, whom they describe as a young Asian male, told the other that he had a gun with him. Naturally, we're in a bind. On one hand, we don't want a crazy person to shoot anyone up, and kind of need to follow up on this. On the other hand, this sounds ridiculous given what we know about our employees. We basically had 2 or 3 people on the engineering team who could match this description, so we discreetly went and asked each one whether they own a gun and or brought one to work. Each denies it. We go back to the reporting party, and they insist that what they heard was very clear, and threaten to call the police if we don't tell them what's up. We had a half hour before they executed this threat. The problem was resolved before the half hour was over, when this reached one of our sales guys. I don't remember how. We might have had to call an all-hands meeting. Turns out that he and an aforementioned young Asian male engineer were in an elevator earlier that day. The sales guy points to the engineer's arms and says, "Hey, how about them guns?" in reference to his musculature. Then there was some joking discussion about bringing it in and packing it or whatnot. Obviously, the other party in the elevator missed the gesture to the arms. Let's just say that nobody got work done for the rest of the day from being bent over with laughter at this situation. We once had a bomb threat in my office. The automatic soap dispenser fell off the wall and someone thought it was a bomb. Apparently, the battery pack on the inside of those has some exposed wires. Well, I'm glad everyone was safe. This other guy that was in the elevator, where was he working? What kind of work did they do? Was there a history of gun violence in the area where they worked? Was there a history of bombs going off where they worked? Story 3. Throwaway because obviously. This isn't really a conversation, but still one of my favorite stories. I worked at a rehab doing HR. I was starting some new hire paperwork with this AC who had just come downstairs from her second interview with the CEO. As I was looking through her interview paperwork and resume, noting that she had been unemployed for 2 years prior, I told her we were going to do paperwork, urine, substance test, and fingerprinting. She immediately stated that she couldn't stick around to do paperwork and she had to go to her current job. Odd. Normally, rescheduling isn't an issue. We just have them urine tested and let them handle the business, as they aren't usually aware that they do paperwork immediately after being offered the job. 9 times out of 10, they decide they can stick around and complete the paperwork after the test, because 9 times out of 10, they're trying to avoid peeing dirty. Of course, that's what she did. Throughout the paperwork, she was acting nervous, kind of bouncing around in her seat, cutting me off when I was explaining certain forms, etc. I told my supervisor to keep an eye out for her test results. Couple days later, it came back with the highest levels for Peruvian marching powder. I have seen parolees pee in cups right in front of me. I didn't get to sit in on this conversation, but what was reported back to me is that she was so excited for the second interview, potential employee, she had gone out the night before and blew her sobriety on wacky dust and was still going strong during paperwork. Oh, I don't get it. Had she had a problem before? Having some experience in this situation probably does help on the job. But why celebrate like this for a job at a rehab? She had gotten the job. Why did she celebrate that way? Story 4. Not exactly HR, but HR was involved. A bunch of us worked together at a tech company in the 90s. In 2000, the company had its first layoffs. One of us, let's call him Klaus, had been on the management track for the last few years and had been promoted to director just before the layoffs. After the first round of bloodletting, we all got together for lunch off campus. It was a somber occasion until Klaus got there. He was upbeat and happy, so we thought there must have been some kind of good news coming. Klaus proceeded to tell us with pride about his experience that day. He started by telling us about the HR process one had to follow. Everyone who was to be let go had to be escorted to a private room by their manager. Klaus and HR were waiting in the room. The manager had to deliver the bad news to the employee while Klaus and HR supervised. Then, the ex-employee would be walked out by security. The manager wasn't told who was to be let go ahead of time. He would be given a name by Klaus, then told to go fetch that person. Klaus walked us through how he had one of the managers retrieve each employee on their team, one by one, until they were all gone. When they got halfway through the team, the manager realized what was going on but couldn't do anything about it. Klaus was really proud of the fact that he only had to lay off one person that day. When the manager who worked for Klaus finished letting go of the last person on his team, Klaus kept him in the room and gave him the same spiel. In case it's not clear, Klaus made one of his managers do the dirty work to get rid of 14 people before Klaus laid him off. So we're all sitting at lunch together while Klaus is telling us about this. All the rest of us lost our appetites. Klaus couldn't figure out what was wrong. Story 5. Throwaway, as this is occurring at a multi-billion-dollar company and the executives involved are somewhat well known in the media. I worked at a tech company that was in the multi-year process of transferring engineering to an offshore contracting company. For this offshore company, the account was very large, so they had a VP director guy there to make sure things went smoothly. Either way, I would be out of a job, so I would very aggressively call him out on his nonsense publicly. The engineers nicknamed him Lex Luthor because I could defeat him in battle, but I could never unalive him. I say this because I only remember him as Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor was overly flirtatious with a female employee from QA. She was always visibly uncomfortable with it. One late night in the office, Lex Luthor assaulted that poor girl. The girl reported this horrible incident to HR. At this point, the details are not 100% clear. However, the girl was no longer working there after she reported the incident. The CEO made a decision to pay her off or intimidate her not to file a police report/sue. Not sure exactly what happened to her. The CEO did not want to ruin the relationship with the offshore company, so they had Lex Luthor work from home. The logic was that he could not spicily harass anyone over the phone or email. At this point, the executives thought they had this covered up. In the following days, there was a large 30-people engineering meeting. Lex Luthor was on the phone. An engineer presented an idea, and Lex Luthor fired back with a competing idea. One of the engineering directors snidely sided with Lex Luthor. Then, the engineer retorted with, "At least I didn't violate anybody." The room went silent, and the meeting ended right there. The cover-up was no longer covered up. The working relationship with Lex Luthor ended immediately. Shortly after, the chief people officer was so disgusted with the incident and the CEO's intervention on a clear HR issue that she left the company. The company continued with their offshoring efforts. Story 6. HR was involved, but not a worker. So I was 19 and working for a crummy call center for the summer to pay for uni. My team leader, T, was lovely, very kind and encouraging. About a month after I'd started, I was heading to my boyfriend's house, which was 40 miles away, and T just so happened to live near him. Great, lovely conversations, and nothing inappropriate. Then, things got weird. He started abusing his power over me to get my number and texted me really inappropriate things. His daughter was older than I am. I always tried to laugh it off and mention his wife and daughter. Anyway, one day I decided I didn't know what to do. So into HR I go with my phone. Big no-no. No one was allowed a personal phone. And as I'm sitting there, he starts texting me off his business and personal phone about what I'm wearing and what he wants to do to me. Both representatives looked so shocked. They could see I hadn't encouraged him and took photocopies of the texts. Next thing I know, he's being dragged in along with the CEO, and I have to say to him it made me uncomfortable. He was given a slap on the wrist and told to go away. I was asked not to take it further. Funnily enough, all my bonuses became impossible. I couldn't do anything right, and it was obvious I was not wanted there, so I left. And he was arrested for violation 6 months later. Dang, props to you for reporting him. It's sad that she was pressured to leave, but it's good that she got out of there when she did. Was there any legal action she could take about being denied bonuses? Isn't that retaliation? After the scumbag got arrested, what happened to the CEO? Did his reputation diminish at least? Story 7. Not in HR, but had plenty of awkward interactions. My favorite? I spoke to my supervisor regarding my title. I was called a sales support engineer, as my coworkers did the same projects, etc. as me, but had a different title, structural engineer. Head of HA said, "Since we're owned by a Spanish company, titles are unimportant. We're all the same." I brought up a few points as to why that was a nonsense answer, and the conversation basically fizzled out. A few days later, a new phone/organizational chart was distributed, and all job titles had been removed. For a good week or so, customers would call in, and our customer service reps, who seemed to be replaced on a weekly basis, would flat out tell people, "I have no idea who to transfer you to." Outside of this, my catalytic converter was cut out of my car one day, and she told me, "Those fall out all the time. When I started working here, mine did." I'm very glad I don't work there anymore. Story 8. Not HR. Old job, years ago. I had a gig at a company that did registration software for events. Our QC environment is mostly for the business team, but very important clients can be given free rein in QC if they need to test stuff pretty intensively. Some events have some very complicated rules about who can register for what. I remember talking to one of my coworkers when our manager stopped by, looked at him, and said, "I need to talk to you about poopy pants." I was tempted to crack a smile, but I shut up and let the game play out. Turns out this guy was using rather juvenile names for his test records in QC, and management, and the business line, and more or less anyone who likes to conduct themselves professionally was concerned that clients might see this. He didn't get fired. He did, however, get mercilessly ribbed for it, as much as you can to someone who has little sense of shame. When I talk to my old work buddies, I can break out that line and everyone smiles. Story 9. HR had one with me. Was crazy and awkward. We had mandatory yearly interviews. I come in and they ask me all kinds of questions about whether or not I carry weapons. Am I active politically? Have I ever been in a fight? Who are my enemies? Etc., etc. Seemed odd, but I didn't do anything about it. Later, others are discussing their interviews and they were asked about sports, music, families, etc. Turns out some moron reported me as potentially dangerous because I never attended off-work functions, kept to myself, and am fluent in German. Yes, that is a thing 70 years onward, apparently. I'm the most harmless guy I know. You have a higher chance of finding anthrax on frickin' Karen's church-baked sale cookies than you do finding so much as a thumbtack on me. I'd be the easiest guy for hostage negotiations to ever beat if I went nuts. They'd ask me what I want, I'd reply, "Frick it, I'm tired, you win." The South Park negotiator from the Veal episode could take me. That's an unfortunate situation. That sounds like something you should report to HR, but he had this discussion with HR. If this is the way they function, anyone could be reported for anything if you come up with enough excuses. Everyone's a suspect. It's straight up profiling. Story 10. 1. Speaking to a team member about their odor. 2. Having to call the CEO on a Sunday afternoon because his general manager had just turned up blotto for an afternoon shift. 3. Discussing with a chef not wiping his nose nuggets on the wall. 4. Explaining to a waiter that her recent abortion wasn't appropriate conversation for guests. 5. Walking into a bathroom covered in vomit from our closeted bulimic waiter. 6. Having to discipline a waiter for banging the apprentice on the kegs in the cool room. 7. Having to discipline the same apprentice for shooting up in the break room. She was fired for this. 8. Discussing with a contracted painter that it wasn't cool to come in before his shift started and sink 2 pots before climbing ladders all night. 9. Confronting a chef about the lovely dinner we had at his house on hotel plates with hotel cutlery cooked using hotel inventory. Story 11. I did my own HR for my department. I hired a lady who interviewed well. Turned out, she was an alcoholic. She would stash booze in the ladies' washroom. The toilet tank and the space above the ceiling tiles were her favorite spots. She was drunk every day by 2 p.m., as witnessed by several other employees. Remarkably, she was able to function somewhat in this state. Talked to her about this, and she denied it. Even after we found the stash, and even after we found her completely inebriated. I had to fire her, even though when drunk she was still more productive than some of the other clowns working for us then. I used to work with a guy who was completely hammered 24/7. He'd bring water bottles filled with vodka and chug them like they really were water. This dude was the hardest worker there. He could function better drunk than most can sober. Story 12. I don't work in human resources, but I'm very close with my management team. We have an employee in an administrative position who drinks on the job. Habitually. Beer. She leaves her cans in the bushes. Everyone knows about it, and management had to step in. It's sad. Sadder is that her hygiene is lacking, to put it mildly. She smells bad. I heard all about the conversation. She cried because she was embarrassed. We have all tried to help, giving her clothing and bras and purses, advice and support. She doesn't want the help. I appreciate all the stress my bosses went through, though. I can't imagine telling someone they smell and have to clean up. How uncomfortable. And yes, there is help available to her through a work network for her alcoholism and anything else she needs. I'm more amazed that there was help available in some sort of program the company provides. I don't think many other positions would have that. How did she function at work? Was she like the people in the previous stories that could function well even though they were drunk? Story 13. I have so many. Our maintenance clerk was finding letters in the public restroom that were threatening towards another employee. This happened for several days. We checked cameras, and that employee was going in the bathroom the same time each day, minutes before the maintenance clerk would go in to clean the restroom. Another time, an employee made up an elaborate story about why they called in, Turned out they had been arrested. Another employee claimed they suffered a head injury and was out of work for 12 weeks. She was on the local news during that time, working for a charity. Even did an interview and was completely fine. Story 14. I used to run background checks on potential employees. It's always weird to find those people who didn't finish their degrees by like 1 credit and have been in the industry for a while. And then when they're looking to trade up to a better position, this comes out. I know in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big deal. But if I have any advice for people, is that you never want to get caught lying to HR. I've seen people lose VP positions because of this nonsense. I'm a college registrar who gets calls from peeps like you about peeps like that. I've ended jobs by telling people that Director X didn't earn a degree from us for 3 credits. And believe me, we check. We double-check because the cost for us being wrong is a lot. Story 15. When I worked as a supervisor at a retail store, there was one female employee who we kept on who was developmentally delayed in some ways. Not quite sure what it was, but we kept her on to keep her busy and stock shelves, greet customers, etc. Well, she had a terrible body odor problem that none of us leaders were sure how to address. Finally, one of the managers came up with the idea of purchasing her a gift basket full of care products, including soaps, shampoos, etc., and presented it to her as a gift from the leadership team. During the conversation, they dropped plenty of hints that she should use those products and similar products before she came into work each day, and there was never another issue with her body odor after that. The most reasonable execution and outcome in this whole thread. Tact is important. I have to say, I thought this was gonna go south. Maybe everyone's hints really got to her. I wonder how tactfully they approached it. It was good that everyone got on the same page. I'm really glad this was resolved. I guess it had to be an issue if she was customer-facing, but good to everyone involved for being civilized. Story 16. Not in HR, but I'm a supervisor. I've had to have several talks with people about personal hygiene. Those are always fun. The most awkward was a lady who was a new hire and came in smelling like a fish market on a hot day. I had to talk to her about it, and she told me she had a bad infection, then offered to take off her pants and show me the site of the infection. I sent her home until it cleared up, and she just never came back to work. I'm going to choose to believe she was in mind-altering meds for the infection and was simply too embarrassed to come back. Story 17. My best friend works in HR. She said the worst one was an incident that involved a younger girl who, well, had some pretty intense odor coming from her lady parts. Not just during her menstrual cycle, all the time. Rancid tuna and decomposing flesh stank. Apparently, her coworkers were utterly baffled as to why a person in her late 20s had no idea how strong her smell was. Turned out her mom had never taught her how to clean up properly. Anyway, the other ladies took her aside afterwards and sort of gave her a lesson on being a properly groomed young lady. Got her a lot of products, answered questions and such. From what I heard, she's doing a lot better now, so happy ending. Story 18. My mom works in HR for a semiconductor company and always had great stories about the people that she works with. One story that sticks out is she had an engineer that would always pick his nose and wipe it on something, which obviously made people uncomfortable. When she brought this up with him, he responded, "But I use my pen, so they don't know." He thought sticking a pen all the way up his nose was discreet. Bill, we're here right now to talk to you about your snot problem. People know. We all know, Bill. It's not my problem. Bill. So many hygiene stories, one right after the other. I'm amazed none of the employees were mocking the employee about their odors. All of them seem to go through HR. It's kind of a good thing, though. If the employees were making that one feel bad, then they would probably, even though it was true that they had an odor, would still complain to HR, and then that employee would be in trouble for not being sensitive. Story 19. Not in human resources, but once I was a manager of a department, and I had to have an uncomfortable talk with an employee about why they needed to put on deodorant before work. This dude smelled so bad that when you opened the door to where he was working, you were hit with a stench immediately, and several people had complained about it. I had a coworker like that once. Some of the other guys ended up leaving a stick of deodorant in his locker. Story 20. Late to the party, but mine is this. Accompanied an employee to a specialist appointment for a leg injury they had suffered. Went in to pick up the x-rays, and the doc said that the leg injury was degenerative, would be there forever, and the guy wouldn't ever walk properly again. I drove him crying back to his house. As someone dealing with serious leg pain lately, and not having a firm answer on why or how to fix it, this hurts. Story 21. Not HR, but was manager in a call center. Had to ask an employee to stop taking off his shoes and peeling his toenails off while at work. He gave me a deer-in-the-headlights look and asked, "Why?" I once dated a girl when I went to meet her parents at their house for dinner. At around the midpoint of dinner, she kicked off her shoes, propped her foot up on the table, and started to trim her toenails. Did not continue dating her long after that. Story 22. I worked in HR. Coworker had to talk to a woman about pooping all over the bathroom every day. Apparently, it was a crime scene every single day because she hovered and was huge. I think she cried a lot about it and quit afterwards. I had to talk to a guy about body odor once. It wasn't that bad. He didn't know he had the stank on him and was glad someone told him. Went to the doctor and got some prescription for it that cleared it right up. He was a stinky mongrel, though. Reeked of straight-up armpit all day. Story 23. One of our employees kept harassing an intern about teabagging, and I had to explain what that meant to our counsel and SVP of HR. Left my Facebook open once, and my friend posted a status insinuating that I enjoyed rug munching. Was friends with my boss on Facebook and had the pleasure of explaining to him what that term meant the next day. Story 24. Not an HR rep, but I was a supervisor at a job that hired a lot of kids fresh out of college. For some, it was their first job ever. We hired a guy around the same time 2 Girls, 1 Cup came out. He was getting random coworkers to watch it so he could make reaction videos of them. I had to explain to him why making unsuspecting people watch women pooping and then eating said poop wasn't appropriate at work. Story 25. I had to ask one of my employees at my old job to stop lifting up his shirt and rubbing his hairy nipples while he wandered about the shop. We worked in food. I bet he left to go work for the cable company. Story 26. I haven't worked in HR, but at one of my jobs, the HR lady thought it would be a good idea to post a complaint a customer had about a worker's personal hygiene. She took it down after people started asking her why it was posted. Story 27. I worked in HR and had to tell a guy to stop self-pleasuring in the bathroom. Every time he left the bathroom, it smelled like semen, and sometimes he got it on the toilet. Story 28. I'm not in HR at all, but our former HR lady told us that at her last job, she had to bring an employee into her office to ask why he purposely set fire to their loading dock.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.